Hello guys, Mandalorian Season 2, it's on its way, this is the way, and I'm very looking forward to watching that very soon, and leading up to it I did rewatch The Mandalorian Season 1, which is a show I loved when it first came out, and rewatching it I still love it, and today I thought I'd rank the 8 episodes of the show from worst to best. Now, this video will include mild spoilers for The Mandalorian if you haven't seen it. Yeah, let's rank the 8 episodes of Season 1 of The Mandalorian. Coming in at number 8 is going to be Episode 5, The Gunslinger. This episode was directed by Dave Filoni, and it's easily the weakest episode of the show. I'm not a big fan of this episode. I think his directing, even though visually it's good, and of course what he does with the Clone Wars is quite impressive, but live action wise, he's not really able to communicate with his actors very well, and I feel like some of the acting in this episode is especially poor. Especially from this bounty hunter guy that he meets. I wasn't a big fan of the story of this one as well. It was a cool Western episode, and I liked the filler episodes all taking place of a different part of the Star Wars universe. Like Episode 4 was a samurai episode, Episode 5 is a Western, Episode 6 is a pure sci-fi. These are all different elements of the Star Wars universe, which I like. But this one felt a little weak to me. Had some beautiful shots. Ludwig Göransson's score is always going to be phenomenal in these episodes. I like how he does a different rendition of the score for each episode. And also, of course, the Mandalorian himself, Pedro Pascal, is always great, and what he's able to do as the character in a subtle way is really interesting. But this episode was just weak to me. Not a big fan of this one. I'm also going to be rating each of these episodes on a scale of 100, so I would give this episode still a good score of a 72%. Moving on, at number 7, I have Episode 2, The Asset. This episode I actually really do like. Getting into the episodes I actually really like now, but this episode feels just the most filler to me. I feel that you can watch Episode 1 and 3, and this one, besides a few things, doesn't really have to be there. It's still an interesting episode though, I do like it. There is a lot of great scenes. I like the Mud Horde scene. It's the first use of the Force we see in this season, and it's very interesting. I like the scene with the Jawas and the Sandcrawlers, pretty cool. But this episode is the shortest episode, and it feels like the shortest episode. It feels like the most uneventful episode. It's still enjoyable, it's still a lot of fun, but not an episode I necessarily like to go back to that much. I'm going to give this episode a 77% out of 100. Moving on, at number 6, I have Episode 1, which I believe is called The Mandalorian, also directed by Dave Filoni. This is actually a really good episode featuring good action and good setup for this character of Mando. We see him as this ruthless killer sort of character, this bounty hunter who likes his job, and then the split-second ending of this show where we see his hand reach out to the baby. And in that moment you realise, oh, this guy actually has a heart, and it's emotional, and that's when you start to rethink the character that you just saw. I just think this episode, the first episode of the show, should have been a bit longer to really get us invested into it. I don't really get invested into this show until about Episode 3 or 4. Episode 1 didn't do a great job at getting us invested into it, but it's still a great episode filled with great action. I like the subtle hints towards it, like with IG-11, that we see then later in the show that mean more. Pretty interesting, I like that. Episode 1, I think, is pretty great. I think it's a good, solid opening, but it's the episode I've seen the most times, and I feel like I don't really want to go back to it much again. I'm going to give this episode an 82%. Coming in at number 5, I have Episode 6, The Prisoner. This episode I thought was actually pretty great the first time I saw it, and I still think it's great now. But when I first saw it, it was in my top 3 favourite episodes of the show, and it isn't still there. I still really like this episode. It's definitely very sci-fi heavy, this one. A gang of smugglers getting onto a ship. Pretty interesting. I like the story here. There's some added tension interweaved. I like a lot of the side characters that they use. They all have some interesting tendencies to them, and I'm excited to see what they do with them more later in the series. And yeah, I did like this episode overall. It has some pretty solid direction of action sequences and some suspense. I like the techno-y sort of score they use. But this episode didn't really have that much to it on rewatch for me. It's just a lot of fast-paced action, and even though I think it is a pretty great episode, nothing is really learnt of the greater plot or story in this one that really affects the character or anything like that. So I'm going to put this episode a bit low on the list because it's not one of the ones, again, I like to go back to. I'm going to give The Prisoner episode an 85%. Coming in at number 4, I have Episode 7, The Reckoning. We're getting to the episodes now that I think are actually pretty great. This episode did exactly what it needed to do to be the perfect leeway into the finale, season finale, and it does that very, very well, bringing back the characters such as Cara Dune and Greef Karga, which are characters we only saw briefly in the episodes beforehand, and bringing that all together in the big, awesome, emotional ending where, of course, Quill dies and the villain gets the baby. We also get the incredible scene where Moff Gideon comes in on his foldable TIE fighter, and it's a really epic scene, sets up the tension very, very well. He's very intimidating. I love this episode. It's pretty great, pretty well directed. Nothing too much happens. We get to see Force healing for the first time. That was cool. I like the little heist they go through, but as the setup for the finale, it works great. I'm going to give episode 7, The Reckoning, 87%. Coming in at number 3, I have episode 3, The Sin. This is a great episode. I really, really like this episode. I thought it was very, very good, very, very action-packed. This is the episode where I fully get invested into the show, and it's from that moment where Mandalorian gives up the child to the client, and he looks in his ship for that one little moment, and you realize in that moment, without even seeing his face, you realize now he needs to save it. And then he goes on this big mission to save it. We get a lot of big action with the Mandalorians and the Stormtroopers. It's pretty epic. I like this episode quite a bit. It's probably one of the most fast-paced episodes. It's an episode to me that fully gets you into the show, that fully makes you understand the character. We see a bit more of his past in this one, and it's where the show really gets interesting for me. It's a pretty solid episode from beginning to end. Don't have any problems with it. I'm going to give this episode an 89%. Coming in at number 2, I have episode 4, The Sanctuary. This is one of the best episodes in the show, directed by Bryce Dallas Howard, I believe. And she does a brilliant job directing this episode. Surprisingly, the top 2 episodes of the show are the 2 episodes directed by people who have only directed 1 episode in the show. But episode 4, to me, when I first watched it, was one of my least favourites episodes. I just felt it really dragged in the pace. But rewatching it, I really realised how slow-paced this is. I really got to sit there and wonder and think and learn who this character is, learn how much he cares for this child, and we get to see the bounty hunters coming in. We get that epic, monstrous scene with the AT-ST at the end, some great action, some great moments. I love the emotional effect of this episode. Also, it's beautifully shot. This episode looks completely gorgeous. I think it's the best directed episode of all of them. And I just felt myself really immersed, really just taken aback by this episode, rewatching it. I'm going to give episode 4, Sanctuary, a 91%. Moving on, we have episode 8, Redemption at number 1. I love this episode, directed by Taika Waititi, and I love the season finale. Usually season finales are usually the best episodes in the season, and that's no different here for The Mandalorian. This episode has breathtaking action, great emotion, great send-offs for the characters, a great little twisty ending that leaves you wanting more, and this episode is great. The emotional moments when Mando finally takes off his helmet and IG-11 sacrifices himself, a lot of great action towards the start. This is a riveting finale. It's the longest episode. It feels the longest, feels the most intense, has amazing action. Taika Waititi directs it really, really well. There's a lot of great moments here. This is just what a season finale should be. A big, action-packed, awesome escape. And it's a great season finale, and I'm really looking forward to season 2. I'm going to give episode 8, Redemption, a 92%. I think it's the best episode of the show. I think The Mandalorian is great. Excited to see how it can improve in season 2. And guys, let me know your rankings for season 1 of The Mandalorian episodes down below. And are you excited for season 2? What do you think is going to happen? And my review for those episodes will be coming out week by week. And of course, thanks for watching, and this is the way.